I was going to do a preview for tomorrow's games. I'll save that for the morning because there's something else I want to talk about that is going on here. So the Toronto Maple Leafs, who were the worst team in the league 2 years ago. Worst. Worst. Then they win the draft lottery and they get Austin Matthews. The expectation was they'll get a little better, but they won't make the playoffs. Maybe they'll make the playoffs the year after. They're a victim of their own success. 2014-15, they had 68 points. That was when Phil Kessel was their leader. They decided to tear it down. The following season, they actually got one extra point. They got 69 points, but one less win. So they win the Austin Matthews draft lottery. 16-17 with Matthews at the helm, they improved by 26 points. They go out in the first round against Washington in 6. Now this year, it's 49, 26, and 7 is the record. They got 105 points. That is a franchise record. Now, we can talk about shootouts and points you get awarded and how teams in the 70s and 80s wouldn't have got that, and that's fine. But still, 105 points, I don't scoff at it because they were a 69-point team 2 years ago. I've seen a lot of posts tonight, the Leafs always let me down. They're always garbage. They're just garbage. They're not, though. And as a Bruins fan, I'm kind of surprised I'm doing this, but hey, from 2006 to 2016, they made the playoffs once. The only year that they made it was 2013. A lot of people, myself included, said they made it because it was a lockout-shortened season, and over an 82-game season, that team doesn't make the playoffs. They haven't won a series since 2004. That's when they made it to the second round, and they were out. But while everybody's excited about Matthews, he's only in his second year. And if you look at great, all-time great players, okay, that we all agree are great Stanley Cup competitors. Crosby, his first year he's out. His second year he's out in the first round. Third year they get to the finals and lose. And the fourth year they win the Cup. Matthews is in year 2. Patrick Kane, they missed the playoffs the first year he's there. Conference final the second year. They get the Stanley Cup the third year. But, I'll include it as well, they were eliminated in the first round both years after that. Then they won the Stanley Cup again. So, Kane, who we can all agree is one of the best playoff performers, and we can debate what kind of a man he is, but that's completely side of what I'm talking about here. Kopitar, Anze Kopitar, we all love Kopitar. What a great comeback. First 3 years he's in LA, they missed the playoffs. The next 2 years are out in the first round, they win the Stanley Cup the next year. I remember 2011, they were against Vancouver in the first round, and they kind of scared me. I was really scared. I thought this team was on its way up. I remember in 2010, watching a bunch of LA games on NHL Center Ice when they had it for a free preview, and I was like, these Kings are fun. This is a fun team to watch. They're going to be, a contender at some point. The point I'm trying to make is this. So at the time I'm recording this, because you may be watching this a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, the Leafs are down 2-0 against Boston. Boston's had a fantastic year. Boston's had a run in the second half of the season that is really intimidating. They don't lose at home, and they don't lose very often at all. And yes, Toronto beat them in the regular season 3 games out of 4. Yes, I picked Toronto to knock out Boston because I believe Toronto was coming in playing better hockey. But you know what? Boston's been the better team, and Toronto is still very young. I was going to use the board and put up the names of all the guys who are still young, like Nylander and Marner and Matthews and Morgan Riley. And even Freddie Anderson. And I know there's going to be, a lot of talk about, Anderson's not good enough. This is his second year as a starting goaltender. The lack of it's like the ADHD just takes over. Like, win it now. And I understand that excitement, but it can take time. Sometimes even the greatest have to fail. How many years did Steve Yzerman deal with the fact that his team sucked in the playoffs? They just sucked in the playoffs. They played great all year, and then the playoffs would arrive, and they were the Detroit Dead Things. That was the nickname we all gave them. And there was no reason for us to call them anything else than playoffs. And, when I look at Toronto, I can see some similarities between them and other teams that came before them. So if they're out in the first round, they're out in the first round. I don't think there's any shame in that, because they're building to something. I don't look at Toronto and say, this is it. Next year, they're on the downswing. How can they be? As long as Matthews is healthy, they should compete for the division title next year. I would not be surprised to see Toronto win the division next year. If everybody stays healthy, if they can give Matthews, Marner, and Nylander extensions and get the right group on that blue line. That blue line does need to be fixed. Coming out of Game 2, they've allowed a lot of goals. 12 goals to the Boston Bruins. But offensively, they're solid, and I think their net is good enough to win in the playoffs. Antti Niemi has a Stanley Cup ring. You don't have to be fantastic. You just have to be good and make sure that your team has the key goals that they need at the right time. There's always going to be growing pains for a young team. And to me, that's what the Toronto Maple Leafs are going through, is that growing pains. And of course, everybody's going to we want to win it now. If we can knock out Boston and then Tampa's look vulnerable going into the playoffs, and then all we got to do is beat whoever comes out of the Metro, and we're better than every team in the Metro. So then all we got to do is and then we can get to the final, and then it's probably Nashville or Winnipeg. Oh, imagine if it's Toronto, Winnipeg. The hype is real. But this is part of where, as a fan who's watched the game for a very long time, I'm always guarded in my optimism. Even now, Boston's up 2-0. I am not planning anything ahead of time. I'm not planning for, what's going to happen when we play Tampa, because Tampa would have home ice, so I'm not liking that matchup much at all. But hey, the fact that Toronto's in the playoffs, the fact that there's an expectation on the Maple Leafs shows that Brendan Shanahan, Mike Babcock, Lou Lamoriello, this brain trust knows what they're doing. Look where you were 2 years ago. Look where you are now. 20 extra wins. 36 extra points above where they were 2 years ago. That's a lot. The problem is, I think with all of the points they got and with that regular season record, maybe it did increase the expectation to an unrealistic level. Maybe the expectation was that since the team got the most points they've ever had, then they should have some of the best playoffs we've ever seen. Maybe that's where the issue is. But Toronto's a very good team, and as long as they can get this blue line into better shape, and I don't know who you trade to get it there. I've suggested before Nylander, and Leafs fans are like, are you insane? No, I'm saying you need a top 2 blue liner. You need that horse that can go out on the blue line and play 28 minutes a night. And I like Morgan Riley, but I don't know that he's the guy. I think you need that Roman Josi type defenseman, and it's going to take a lot to get him. Nobody's given away a defenseman like that. And now that Toronto stands where they do, they're not going to get that guy in the draft either. Unless there's some miracle at the draft, the odds of them drafting a guy like that, it's slim. So you have to either get him as a free agent, and teams don't let that defenseman go as a free agent, or you have to make an incredible trade to get him. So that's why I mention Nylander when I do. It's not a slam on Willie. It's the idea that you're going to have to give up a lot to get a defenseman like that. A lot. But I trust Lamoriello. I trust Shanahan. So far, I think the plan has gone quite well. And I understand Leafs fans being frustrated and feeling like it's another year wasted. But in reality, this is only year 2 of the plan. And the Leafs were already ahead of the plan. I think the fact they made the playoffs last year probably on some level, I'm not going to say that it bothered Shanahan because clearly it wouldn't, but I think it probably surprised him too that the team got as much better last year as they were. Because let's just go back. Let's say that Toronto finishes with 3 less points. They finished with 92 last year. They would miss the playoffs. Tampa makes the playoffs instead. This would be Toronto's first foray into the playoffs since 2013, and I think the expectation would have been less. But because they made the playoffs last year and they went out in the first round, the expectation is they're going to get better. And I'm one of the people who said it. They should win a round this year. But they're against a pretty darn good team. Now, if they were losing to a Florida Panthers right now, and they were down 2-0 to Florida, and both games were in Toronto, I would be right there with you guys and saying, I don't know what's going on with Toronto, but there's a problem. The trickiest part, usually, the patience part, is not really the rebuild. We all talk about rebuilds. The patience part is when you've come out of the rebuild and you're on the verge of being a Stanley Cup contender / champion. And Toronto's right on the cusp of something, I think, something special. So for fans who right now are upset and say this team's garbage and da da da, you can't tear it apart. You can't tear it down. You've got to stick with the plan because it works. And if they lose this matchup to the Bruins, you chalk that up to experience, you cast it aside, and next year you move forward. So there's my honest appraisal of where the Leafs are at and what this series against Boston that they're playing right now as I record this means. And I hope this helps for any Leafs fans who are upset right now because it can be hard to see that there's a plan here. I remember when Boston in 2010 had a 3-0 lead on Philly and they blew it. They lost it in 7, and I was so mad for so long. And the following spring, when they played those same Flyers, I was like, oh, here we go again. And then they beat them. And then they won the Cup. So, it happens. And there's no prediction of when, but Toronto's in that conversation, and next year they're still going to be a very good team. And absolutely, if you look at it, it was year 4 Crosby got a cup. It was year 3 for Kane, and it was year 6 for Kopitar. So for Auston Matthews, next year's year 3. He's getting right into that situation next year. I hope that helps. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through you just happened upon this video. And thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.